Which free agents are going to make big impacts in fantasy football in 2025? I'm Theo Greminger. We're talking about free agent rankings for fantasy football. The 2024 free agent class was absolutely incredible. Unbelievable contributions to fantasy football. Start off with Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs. The list goes on. Now, let's not get it twisted. The 2025 class of free agents is not as good as the 2024 class of free agents. And certainly the running back spot is a huge, huge downgrade. But like every single season, there's going to be players who find themselves on new teams and are valued differently in new roles and new schemes. Baker Mayfield, a few years back, signs with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. No one was that excited fantasy-wise, and he's had back-to-back seasons as a QB1 in fantasy football. David Montgomery, a few years back, goes from Chicago, signs with Detroit, was like a 7th-round pick his first year in Detroit, ends up being a top-notch scorer for us on a points-per-game basis. You're seeing it every year, players in new situations making impacts in fantasy football. So free agents this year might not be as exciting to us now, but after they sign, we might have to adjust our ranks.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
So let's start out at number 15. And this is a player who had a really good season. It's going to be Zac Ertz. And Zac Ertz, I fully expect him to re-sign with the Washington Commanders. And why wouldn't he? He had 66 catches this past year, which was 5th highest among all tight ends. And then he was very good in the NFL playoffs. Washington, of course, went on a run to the NFC Championship game, and Zac Ertz had 18 catches, including a really, really strong statistical outing in the blowout loss to Philadelphia in the NFC title game. 34 years old, but Zac Ertz can still play. This is probably going to be the last contract he ever signs. I fully expect it to be with the Washington Commanders, but if Washington, for whatever reason, lets him walk, there will be a number of teams looking to sign Zac Ertz. 14 overall. This name's a little bit under the radar. And very much like Zac Ertz, I expect for Jordan Mason to re-sign with his current team, the San Francisco 49ers. Mason was a player that last year, if you drafted him in redraft or best ball, it was like found money. Christian McCaffrey missed the start of the season. Jordan Mason gave you a very strong start. He was like very fantasy friendly numbers in 4 out of the first 5 games of the season. He had 3 RB1 finishes, all front loaded towards the beginning of the year. He had 789 rushing yards, and he showed that he can handle volume in key situations. I expect him to re-sign with the 49ers, but if he goes out on the open market, Jordan Mason will be viewed by a number of teams as a player who can be a handcuff running back. So he'd really have the same outcome as he did this past year with San Francisco, a contingent upside handcuff, but in the right situation, that profile is very valuable for us on our fantasy benches. Number 13 overall, this is a player that I've sort of been into for years, and this is one where this year was a little bit disappointing because he missed some time, but he ended up closing out the season well. And early best ball drafters are drafting Jaylen Warren inside of the top 30 players at the running back position. Warren is a talented back. He's been in a timeshare with Najee Harris. He has 127 catches as a pro, more than 2,500 yards from scrimmage. He's a very versatile and efficient running back. There's going to be teams that view him as an instant committee back who can help them as both a runner and a receiver out of the backfield. There's also a chance that he re-signs with Pittsburgh. With Najee Harris also a free agent, if they choose to go with Warren, there's a chance Warren leads a committee in Pittsburgh and has real value to us in fantasy football. Now, number 12, a couple people are going to, watching this video, are going to be rolling their eyes because it's Amari Cooper. And Amari Cooper, the days in Buffalo were bad, like bad. He failed to play a high number of snaps. He failed to put up big fantasy football numbers. Amari Cooper is north of 30, but when teams look at him, Are they going to view the small sample size in Buffalo as an indictment of his talent, or maybe just a poor fit for him? When you go back to his numbers in 2023 and 2022 combined, he had 150 receptions. This is a player that for multiple years in Cleveland was the wide receiver one. Before that was putting up big time fantasy numbers in Dallas. Amari Cooper, I think there's going to be a market for him. Now, his days for us in fantasy football are probably numbered, but this is still a player that NFL teams are going to value at the wide receiver spot, even if it's in a wide receiver 3 role. So maybe not a guy that we're going to be drafting next year extremely highly, but maybe an interesting pick for best ball purposes if he lands well. Now, number 11 for me, I'm going to have him a little bit higher than some would, but it's Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson is only 28 years old. This past season for New Orleans, he set career highs with 50 receptions and 548 receiving yards. Juwan Johnson has always been on sort of not so good New Orleans Saints offenses with not so good quarterback play, but I think that the open market is going to value Johnson. He is a player that's had a 7 touchdown catch season, and this year had a 50 reception season. With his age being 28, with his pass catching ability and his ability to make plays inside of the red zone, I think there's certain teams that are going to value Juwan Johnson, and I think there's a chance that he lands well. Could he land in a role like Mike Gesicki did last year in Cincinnati, a potential 1-year starter spot, or is he going to get a little bit longer term contract? I'm not sure how the market treats him, but I think the market is going to be a little more aggressive with Juwan Johnson than some people think. Number 10 for me, Russell Wilson. This one's not exciting. Russell Wilson's 36 years old, but I do think when you look at the limited number of quarterbacks in the 2025 class that could potentially step on a field and start right away, Brett Whitefield and I are projecting 3 quarterbacks to be selected inside the first round. Then you start going down the list of all the teams in the NFL who could be in the market for a quarterback, including Russell Wilson's team last year, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Wilson's 36 years old, but he has improved his situation from a year ago. Last year, he sort of looked down and out. The market was not treating him with any interest. He ends up signing a 1-year prove-it deal with Pittsburgh. Played well enough that I think his next contract could be a 2 or 3 year deal. Pete Carroll was hired in Las Vegas. The Las Vegas Raiders need a quarterback. Now, does Vegas address that issue at number 6 overall in the draft and select a player like Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart or potentially Cam Ward if he falls? Maybe. Or maybe Las Vegas takes the best player available in the draft, addresses other needs, and signs a bridge quarterback. Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson apparently are getting along right now. Russell Wilson also could return to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then there'll be a number of teams like the New York Jets, like the Tennessee Titans, like the Cleveland Browns. Go down the list of teams with bad quarterback situations. Russell Wilson could end up being another 1-year bridge quarterback situation like we saw this year in Pittsburgh, or he could return to Pittsburgh. A number of outs for Russell Wilson this offseason. Number 9 for me, the guy just is ageless. It's Keenan Allen. He's 32 years old. The quality of the play dropped off from 2023 to 2024, but this is still a player that when Thomas Brown took over in Chicago, Keenan Allen put up numbers. He had 4 games with 23 or more PPR points down the stretch in the second half of the season, and he finished the year with 70 receptions and 7 touchdown catches. Now, Keenan Allen's days as a wide receiver 1 and probably a wide receiver 2 are completely over, but there's a number of teams that are going to look at Keenan Allen and say, I can stick him right in the slot. This is still a player who can run routes and catch the ball, and he's going to help my offense. Depending on where Keenan Allen lands, this could be an interesting name to keep an eye on, especially for best ball purposes, but there is a chance that he is in a appealing situation, wide receiver 3 role heading into the 2025 season. 32 years old, but Keenan Allen still has some gas left in the tank. Number 8 overall, this is a player that signed a prove-it deal last offseason and will look to get rewarded. J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins, running back, Los Angeles Chargers. He had 931 rushing yards and 32 receptions. These are both career highs. Dobbins, of course, has dealt with every injury under the sun during his time as a Baltimore Raven. Ends up reuniting with Greg Roman. The offseason, Dobbins was sort of behind Gus Edwards in ADP, and there was a huge contingency of people that thought Kamani Vidal would run away with this job. So Dobbins' season was a pleasant surprise. He ends up getting banged up, but then comes back and plays in the NFL playoffs. So Dobbins, sort of has this moniker that he's injury prone. But I do think that you're talking about a player who was a second-round draft pick when he was drafted, was a high-profile guy in Baltimore, showed he was relatively healthy this year, had 10 runs of 15 yards or more this year, doesn't have the same explosion he did when he was younger, but this is still a back with some juice who can get up and go and be part of a committee. The Chargers could choose to retain Dobbins, but again, it'll be a more player beneficial deal than what they paid him last year, or Dobbins could test the market. Now, there's a number of teams where if Dobbins signs there, he would end up gaining some value. Or if Los Angeles retains him and Los Angeles has another year where they don't draft a running back on day 1 or day 2, then Dobbins could be in a situation he was in this year where he leads sort of a wannabe backfield by committee. The Greg Roman offense, the Chargers were top 12 in rushing attempts last year. So any running back who's in this system has value. But if Dobbins goes to another team, this could be an interesting one. His situation is not so dissimilar to Zach Moss last year, where Zach Moss gains value in Indianapolis when he gets his opportunity, sort of has a career renaissance, and then signs with Cincinnati. Now, of course, Zach Moss got injured, and Chase Brown completely took over that backfield. But Zach Moss is sort of an archetype for the sort of deal I think we see Dobbins get, a 2 or 3 year deal. Now, number 7, this is a very exciting name for fantasy football. It's Justin Fields, because anytime Justin Fields is on an NFL field, he is an option for us in fantasy football, and not just in Superflex. Justin Fields is a quarterback where if he's on the field starting, he's an option for us in single QB formats because of his incredible rushing upside. And Fields started out the year in Pittsburgh 4-2 as a starter, and he was playing well, putting up QB1 numbers like he always does before Pittsburgh made the switch to Russell Wilson. Fields this year at 26 years old, with all these teams who need starting quarterbacks, seems like he could be a bridge quarterback for a team. Now, do they draft a younger player and combine him with Justin Fields? Or does Fields join a situation like he did this past year in Pittsburgh where maybe he's next to another veteran? How about the Las Vegas Raiders? How about the New York Giants? We can go down the list of multiple teams where Justin Fields could sign and have an opportunity to put up big fantasy numbers because of his rushing ability. So the fact that Justin Fields might get another shot at a starting quarterback job this offseason should be an exciting thing for fantasy managers. Number 6 overall for me, this is another one that's going to seem sort of boring, but Najee Harris right now is being treated as almost a running back 4 level player in early best ball drafts. But when you look at Najee Harris, the pro, this is a player that I think NFL teams will value as a free agent. He has rushed for 1,000 or more yards in 4 straight seasons, and he's never missed a game. So he's got the ability to handle volume. He's never had fewer than 255 carries in a season, and he's shown he can carry a workload when needed. Again, he has 1,000 yards for 4 straight seasons, and he's never missed a game as a pro. He also was a first-round draft pick running back. Teams remember this. We oftentimes see teams sign a guy and will say, we loved him coming out of XYZ college. Well, with Najee Harris, there was enough teams that liked him coming out of Alabama that the Pittsburgh Steelers selected him inside the first round. So Najee Harris, definitely an interesting one for us for fantasy football purposes. I think that there's a chance Najee Harris signs well and we see his early best ball ADP improve rapidly. Probably going to be a committee back, but still has enough where if he lands well in a top offense, Najee Harris could regain a little bit of juice. Number 5, Stefon Diggs. Diggs is going to be dealing with an injury. He's got a torn ACL to end his season last year. So this will scare off some suitors, but there'll still be a market for Stefon Diggs. He's set to join his fourth and possibly final NFL team. Houston trades for him last offseason, and he never finished lower than wide receiver 13 in points per game when he was a Buffalo Bill. And this year in Houston, he gave us 15 points per game. Despite being in like a new low ADOT role, he still scored fantasy points. So again, Diggs older, but Diggs could be very coveted by several teams who view him as a player that, when healthy, can help them win football games. Diggs has a ton of production in multiple spots, and this is going to be potentially his last time signing a contract. So I think he will choose this one correctly. I'm not sure if we will see Stefon Diggs back in Houston. I don't think that's completely out of the realm of possibilities. I think more likely than not, we see Stefon Diggs on another team. My number 4 player and my number 1 running back, Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones set career highs this past season with 268 rushing attempts, 1,186 rushing yards, and he also had 54 receptions. So the rushing attempts, the yardage were both career highs, and the 54 receptions was the second most he's had as a pro. Jones has been consistently good. He was good in Green Bay, very good for us in fantasy football, and this year exceeded expectations in his one season in Minnesota. He also showed the ability to handle volume more so than we would have expected at 30 years old. It's actually sort of surprising to see an older back get the most volume of his entire career. So it really shows you that Matt LaFleur in Green Bay might have capped Aaron Jones out in volume. Other teams might not do that. Jones, at the very least, is going to be an appealing player in a running back by committee situation or a tandem backfield next year. And there's a chance that he does exactly what he did this year in Minnesota and lead a backfield. 30 years old is not as scary as it used to be. We talk about guys like Derrick Henry, James Conner, Aaron Jones last year. Jones has more good football left in the tank. And when we include his playoff run last season, in addition to his 2024 season, you think about that Green Bay game against Dallas, that Green Bay game against San Francisco in the 2023 playoffs, Jones has been on an exceptional run of play. Number 3 for me, it's Chris Godwin. And Chris Godwin, this is a really exciting player to come on the open market. 28 years old. He does have an injury history, but when he's on the field, he's continually put up strong numbers fantasy-wise. He remains like a high-end wide receiver 2. And this past year, we saw a return to the slot, had over a 26% target share, and he was living in the slot, over a 55% slot rate. And this year, he looked like he would have been potentially the league winner at the wide receiver spot. He averaged 19.7 points per game, and then he was lost to a season-ending ankle injury that required surgery. Now, I think that Tampa Bay is going to try to bring back Godwin. We've already heard new offensive coordinator Josh Grizzard saying how much they want Godwin, how much of a leader he is. I mean, and that would make total sense. If you're Tampa Bay and you go into next year with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and emerging Jalen McMillan, Bucky Irving at running back, and Kate Otten at tight end, that's pretty good. And that's a nice group of talent for a new offensive coordinator who was promoted to build on. Tampa Bay averaged 29 points a game last year with Liam Cohen. They had one of the league's best points per game offenses in the NFL. Godwin coming back would make a ton of sense. But the line of suitors for Godwin is going to be a long one. There's going to be multiple teams who really value Chris Godwin. The New England Patriots have already been rumored to be into him. Liam Cohen wants to bring him with him to Jacksonville to play opposite Brian Thomas. I think that would get fantasy managers pretty excited. Washington Commanders are going to be in the mix for Chris Godwin. There are Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be in the mix for Chris Godwin. There are multiple teams that will want to sign Chris Godwin. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to do everything they can to retain him. But if he goes on the open market, this is a player who could land very, very well and potentially return to a 15 plus point per game production in 2025. The big two. Okay, let's start at number 2. This is my number 1 quarterback on the list, and it's Sam Darnold. He had 35 touchdown passes this past year, and he ranked 5th in the NFL with 4,300 passing yards. So Sam Darnold was playing very, very well for a lot of the season. Then he had the 2 bad losses down at the very end of the year. The Detroit Lions game in the regular season finale, where the Lions completely manhandled Minnesota. Then the Rams in the wild card round, where they completely manhandled Minnesota. Darnold didn't play well in either of those games. I think most likely Sam Darnold is on another team next year, and Minnesota goes with J.J. McCarthy. That's why they drafted McCarthy. McCarthy was the successor to Kirk Cousins. It makes sense. There's a chance that Minnesota brings back Darnold, but I think it looks way, way, way more likely that Darnold is leading another team next year. Now, Sam Darnold's only 27 years old. It seems like he's been in the NFL forever, and he's been sort of a journeyman, but he rejuvenated his career this year in Minnesota. I bring up the name Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield signs with Tampa Bay. We weren't into it, and Mayfield ran with it. Could Sam Darnold sign with a team where he has success? We could see that, because Sam Darnold, again, 27 years old, coming off of a 35 touchdown pass season. So whatever you think about Darnold in pre-2024 terms, there's going to be teams who look at that profile with the draft capital spent on Darnold and say he's just a late bloomer. So all of the teams we mentioned for Justin Fields, all the teams we mentioned for Russell Wilson, I think there will be even more teams trying to sign Sam Darnold. And the number 1 free agent in the 2025 class, and it's not even close, is T. Higgins. T. Higgins is the crown jewel of the class. He's 26 years old. He's consistently displayed wide receiver 1 skills when he's on an NFL field. He plays on the same team as Jamar Chase, but even alongside Jamar Chase this year, he averaged 18.5 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues. He also, despite missing 5 games with injuries, I get it, T. Higgins gets banged up sometimes, but despite missing 5 games, he had 10 touchdown catches. If T. Higgins goes on the open market and signs a contract with another team, you're talking about a wide receiver making $32 to $35 million a year. Now, what is the most likely situation? It sounds like Cincinnati is going to do everything they can to retain T. Higgins. Last year, T. Higgins signs with the same agent as Jamar Chase. Kind of makes sense if he sticks with the same agent. That makes it more likely for Cincinnati to get both those guys under contract. Joe Burrow desperately wants T. Higgins back. So I think Cincinnati is going to do everything they can to retain T. Higgins. But this is a funny league. Things happen. And if T. Higgins goes on the open market and signs with somebody else, you are talking about a massive contract. The New England Patriots, the Carolina Panthers, the Washington Commanders. There are Pittsburgh Steelers. There's a number of teams where T. Higgins could sign and become an instant wide receiver 1. And the biggest appealing thing about T. Higgins is this is not a 30-year-old. This is a 26-year-old. Teams are going to pay for that. They will pay more and give a longer-term contract because of the player's age and the ability for him to have a longer shelf life. T. Higgins is your number 1 free agent in 2025. I'm Theo Greminger. Make sure you're subscribing for videos like this. We're dropping everything you need to win in fantasy football over at Fantasy Points every single week. We'll see you soon.